This is a lecture from Open Tuition. For the free lecture notes that go with this podcast, please visit opentuition.com.
By far the most popular historically is receivables. However, it was asked last time. I've said it's much more likely to be inventories. Bits of payables are rare, but if he does ask it, it's only ever to the level it was in that example, so I've not got a handout on it. The only other one, which he rarely asks, and it's difficult to predict when he will, is cash. And on cash, apart from writtens, and I've given you a note somewhere you can look at it, if there's going to be any numbers on cash, the most likely would be to do a cash budget. Where I'm not going to lecture on a cash budget. I think you're all clear in principle what we mean. That a cash budget, he'll give you information about your sales, your costs and things. He'll give you information about how long it takes receivables to pay and how long it takes us to pay payables. And he'll expect you to set up a monthly cash budget, perhaps for 6 months, where, month by month, it's not arithmetically hard, it's simply reading the question in speed, but I do it in columns, but for each month, January, February, and so on. Now, you're listing what cash receipts you expect, what cash payments you expect, and therefore, each month, whether you expect a cash surplus or a cash shortage. Do you agree? Now, for me to go through an example on that or to lecture it would be a bit silly. It's not technically hard. It's better shortly you see it in a real example. Alright? I'll have a practice. If anybody's wondering how to lay it out, in those sheets I handed out, you'll see a pro forma cash budget. I shouldn't use a waste of paper, but just listing month by month your receipts, your payments. Well, again, it's far better you see it by example than me mess around. In principle, it's very easy. Any problem in the exam will be a combination of careful reading and speed. Right? There won't be anything technically hard. However, you can try one of those after lunch. That he certainly could do, and it's the most likely if there is cash management. A second thing, in theory, he can ask is something called the Baumol model. However, I say in theory, he does mention it in the syllabus, but to go through it, I really do think it'd be wasting your time. Baumol model is completely mad. It's completely unrealistic. I don't think he'll ask it for that reason. It's actually the same formula as stock control, but it needs a formula. He doesn't put the formula on the formula sheet. If you ever did ask it, he'd have to give you the formula separately. I don't think he will. It's never been asked in the history of the exam. New syllabus, old syllabus. I think because it's completely stupid. I'm sorry, I just don't think there is any chance at all. If you want to be 100% covered, look back in the course notes. But I really think I'd be wasting everybody's time. The final thing, though, which he hasn't asked and he is going to, I don't think this time, but I may be wrong, is Miller-Orr. So far, he hasn't asked Miller-Orr, but he has started giving the formula for it. He's going to sometime, and so to be safe, we've got to make sure. Right? I think probably, in fact, the first time he'll ask it will just be a bit of writing. But let me remind you or check with you quick what Miller-Orr is saying. Immediately after I'll show you the arithmetic, which is very easy. Then you can have a go at one or two. What Miller-Orr is saying is this. The idea is very, very simple, and I think very, very sensible. Companies' cash balances, clearly, the cash balances of companies obviously varies, depending on the type of business and the time of year and so on. There are times when the cash balances perhaps some days they get pretty high, other times the cash balances get pretty low. Do you agree? I think you'd all agree sensibly, if you found your cash balance was getting very high this month, it's silly just to leave it sat in an ordinary account earning virtually nothing. If your cash balance was getting very high, why not transfer it perhaps to a deposit account and earn a bit of interest? Yep, sensible. And then next month when you need the cash, transfer it back again. Well, that's all Miller Orr are saying. But they're saying we don't have to transfer money every 5 minutes. They say set limits. And I know some of you have seen this graph, but it only takes a second. Suppose I tell you, I've decided for my business, for whatever reason, my absolute minimum cash I need is perhaps 5,000. I've got to keep 5,000 in the bank to cover expenses and things, but that's my absolute minimum. However, perhaps this month I'm doing very well, and maybe I started at 5,000, but my cash balance has been going up. Oh, I don't know what it did there, but my cash is going up this month. They suggest that sensibly what you do is let cash go up, but fix yourself an upper limit. And say, well, if ever the cash balance hits that upper limit, then make a transfer to deposit. And so maybe I've fixed an upper limit of 10,000. I've said, okay, my cash balance fluctuates a lot, I'll let it go to 10,000. But the minute it hits 10,000, then I'll make a transfer to a deposit account and earn on it. All right? And so we've hit the limit, and we'll make a transfer to deposit. However, finally, I've said I need an absolute minimum of 5, so I could sort of transfer the whole excess to deposit. But they say, rather than go right down to the minimum again, because cash balances may start to fall, they say we should set what we call a return point. And maybe, I'll tell you where the numbers come from afterwards, but maybe I've fixed a return point of 7,000. So for the minute I've just made up numbers, all right? But they say, once the balance hits my upper limit of 10,000, I'll transfer 3,000 to deposit, which pushes the balance down to 7. So I've got money now on deposit, earning money. Maybe I carry on doing well this month. My balance goes up again. Well, again, as soon as it hits 10,000, transfer to deposit. Again, I've transferred 3,000. It goes back to the return point. However, maybe the following month is a bad month and my balance starts falling. Well, no problem, let it fall. However, as soon as it reaches my bottom limit of 5,000, then I'll take money from deposit. Here I'll take 2,000 from deposit. Because again, we go to this return point. And so I shouldn't need to carry on there. You're putting money to and from deposit. It needs 3 limits in a sense. We have to fix an upper limit, a lower limit, and a return point. But I hope I've made it clear what we're talking about. Because I say, the first time he asks it, I think we'll just be writing that with an upper and lower limit, you let your cash balances, what you might say, fluctuate between the two. But every time you hit the upper, you put money on deposit. If you hit the lower, you take money from deposit. You have this return point. The night after 7,000. I hope that made sense, the idea behind Miller, or, because like I said, although he can ask the numbers, if he does, I think more likely he would have written about it. As far as the numbers are concerned, though, just to be safe, again, a very quick one. If you look at your formula sheet, it's a question, apart from discussing it, Miller or tell you how to fix the limits, you know, your upper limit, your lower limit, your return point. The lower limit is fixed by the company depending on the type of business, you know, what is the minimum cash they need. So that's something they have to get from cash budgets and things. In the exam, you'd have to be given the lower limit. So he'll tell you that. On the formula sheet, if you check, you've got formulae for the return point and Xana's appeared. The return point and for the spread. So you can use them and then you appreciate what we've got. You have to do the spread first. Oh dear. The formula for the spread, it's 3 times 3/4. You've got it written down, so don't copy it, there's no need. But times 3/4 of the transaction cost times the variance of the cash flows divided by the interest rate, all to the power 1/3. So although it is just sticking figures in a formula, several things. First of all, be clear here, not what symbols, that's not a problem, but be clear what each of those figures is. The transaction cost, first of all, is the costs involved every time you put money on deposit or take money off deposit. So if you look at the question I've just handed you, we need a minimum cash balance of 10,000. The transaction cost is $5 per transaction. So transaction cost is 5. And if he asks one, he won't hide the figures at all. I'll explain why in a minute. However, the variance, one bit of learning here. What is the variance? I'm not going to give a statistics lecture because it's just irrelevant, but the variance is the standard deviation squared. Now I say I'm not going to give a statistics lecture, it really would be wasting time. You need the variance. If you're lucky, he'll give it you, but he can expect you to know its standard deviation squared. And as I say, this the formula isn't given. If you want to be safe, learn it. Here, I've told you the standard deviation. The standard deviation is 2,000 a day. The variance, therefore, is 2,000 squared. I won't work that out yet. I mean, it's easy enough, but I might as well do the whole thing in the formula. All right? But we're all with me. So he'll either give you variance or standard deviation. Standard deviation is square it. Finally, the interest rate Well, you can see what I've done here, but always, certainly in the exam, you'll use the variance per day. And the standard deviation here was per day. You'll use the interest rate per day. If he gives you the yearly rate, as I have here, 5.11%, the daily rate, you just divide by 365 to get a rate per day. And just be careful, because it does come to a very small figure. Here I've done the workings, you can check it, but it's 0.014%. 1% would be 1. 0.1 would be 0.1 of 1% and so on. But it's 0.014 of 1%. It's then just sticking in the formula, except, of course, you're going to have to take a power a third or a cubed root. It's up to you whether you risk it or not, but it's one of the very few places in the exam where you would need a fancy calculator. Has anybody got a fancy calculator with them? Oh good, somebody can check me then. But all of you, make sure you're happy what's going where. The spread, I'll make sure you're clear what it is and why we need it after, but the spread here, 3 times 3/4 of the transaction cost of 5 times the variance, which is 2,000 squared, divided by, now it's here, be careful, the interest rate as a as a decimal. If it was 1%, you'd write 0.01. If it's 0.1%, it would be 0.001. If it's 0.01%, it's I'm going to get this wrong, 0.00014. You all with me? It's all of that to the power a third. It's up to you and it depends on your calculator. But a third, remember, I think you're all happy from school, something to the power of a third is the same as, we call it cubed root. Yep. So whichever, will somebody with a proper calculator check me? 3/4 times 5 times 2,000 squared divided by 0.00014. I'm not going to write down what I've got at the moment, it's a very big number. The cubed root of that, I get 4749 point something. But if you leave it in your calculator and multiply by 3, has anyone checked? I get 14,249. All right? As I say, if you haven't got a calculator, it's up to you whether you take the risk. But you'll need a fancy one for later exams anyway. If when you get home, you can't get the same answer, photocopy your calculator now and email it, and I'll tell you which buttons to press. However, the relevance of it, 2 things. We can all stick numbers in a calculator ultimately, but we need these three things: lower limit, return point, upper limit. First of all, the lower limit, as I said, has to be given you. And here is the first line. The minimum cash balance is 10,000. That would be given in the exam. What we mean by spread is the difference between the lower and the upper limit. So although he doesn't write this on the formula sheet, do remember or learn that your upper limit is the lower limit plus the spread. Now, as I say, that's not given you, and so learn it. But here, once you've put the figures in the formula, it's easy enough. The lower limit is 10,000. The spread is 14,249. Is everybody with me? Or 250, I'm not worried about a dollar. But there is your upper limit. I say that's not given you on the formula sheet. You're given the formula for spread. Hello? I'll wind back to my picture in a minute. But make sure you're clear what we do with it. The upper limit is the lower limit plus the spread. Alright? Finally, the return point this you are given the formula for. On the formula sheet, it's the lower limit plus a third of the spread. And so, of course, provided you manage to get the spread, this is easy as well. The lower limit is 10,000, a third of a spread of 14,249. Well, everybody can check me on this one. Oh, is it 14,749? 14,750? Is that right? And there we are. And without repeating everything I said before lunch, appreciate what we've got. If you look back to that little graph I gave you, I'd invented figures before, but the true figures in this question in this particular question, your lower limit is 10. Your upper limit, what was it? Was it 24? Shout somebody, 24? 749? 249? And the return point, 14,750? And so, it's the same discussion, obviously, but here, you let the cash fluctuate between 10 and 29, 24,249. If ever it hit the 24, transfer on deposit, bring it back to 14,750. In other months, if it got as low as 10,000, as soon as it hits 10,000, take from deposit. Again, you go back to your 10,000. Okay. So again, the idea's nice. I think the formula are a bit unrealistic. As I said, to be able to calculate standard deviations isn't in your syllabus, but anybody who's ever seen them, to calculate that in real life is what makes it a bit hypothetical.